Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamit in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation, Anshe Emet. Joining me are my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry Chesler, the Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island. We are recording this on day 341, 11 months. It's at more than 11 months. Praying for the hostages, as always. You know, we watch a lot of news and a lot of programs in life in Israel, of course, during these so difficult times. But, you know, you watch a video of a special or something, and the performer gets up and says at the beginning, let's start off with this. Let's start off remembering them. Let's start off with thinking about them and praying that they can come home, and that everybody who is deployed anywhere comes home, and that families can reunite, etc. And we are praying for that as well during very, very difficult days, during what has been a couple of difficult weeks in Israel. We devoted a lot of that attention last week, and many people responded to the heartfelt conversation that we had last week about the hostages who were murdered. And we appreciate your comments to us and writing to us, and of course, welcome any comment that you have. This week we're studying Parashat Ki Teitzei, and I've often noted in the past that Ki Teitzei has the most mitzvot of all the parshiot in the Torah. If you use the term mitzvah density, it's the most mitzvah dense parsha of the Torah, and therefore you should also live a mitzvah dense life.
So, just out of curiosity, there are over 10% of the laws, I think it's 72, are in this parsha. Do you know what the second is?
No.
So only reason why I ask is if you take the other 53 parshiot, that means they have on average 2% of the law.
Sure.
And this has 12%, something like that.
Right.
No, but that's not quite, that doesn't quite work out, because in Breshit there's zero. So
unless you
No, I understand that, but I mean, it just heightens how many mitzvot there are. It doesn't leave a lot of room for the parshiot. I spoke last night at our back to school night, and I mentioned, I didn't use mitzvah density. I guess we should have recorded yesterday, so I could have incorporated it. But it's just striking how full of law this parsha is, because it leads to the question you wanted to ask.
Well, this is the question I want to ask, which is, go ahead. So just one little thing.
I think probably, and I happened to say this last week in shul, according to Sefer HaChinuch, the 13th century catalog of mitzvot that basically follows the Maimonidean enumeration of the 613, Shoftim has 14 plus 27 is 41 mitzvot, and Ki Teitzei Ishba Esrim Vasheva plus Arba'im Vasheva.
Oh, so it's 74.
74.
By 2.
74, 42, and 74. These two parshiot
are the most mitzvah dense.
I mean, I didn't check about Shoftim, but I didn't check that Shoftim is actually number 2. But if you put these two together, you got a huge percentage of all the mitzvot.
All right. So here's my question, which is, you do the imaginative leap that you are listening to Moses, give this speech, and you are in the audience, and you turn to Irving next to you, I'll just call him that, and say, what is he talking about? I don't understand what he's talking about. I mean, rebellious child,
so
and on and on and on. There's 74 of these, and it's going on and on and on. It's like, give me a break, please. It's too much. It's really so much information that's coming at me. One second, and it's not like this is the first speech here. This is we're 3/4 of the way into the book now. We've been listening to lots of exhortations, lots of perorations, lots of reframing of experiences, and now we're getting a whole code here. And what is the intended response, or how, Rabbi, help me love this parsha. That's what I want to say. Help me love it. I do love it. It is amazing, because every parsha is amazing, and there's something here that's truly amazing. But I need some guidance here. I need to be like taken by the hand and explained. Someone needs to explain to me how to read this and how to listen to it. And what's my experience in shul? I'm going to listen. I'm going to sit for 40 minutes and listen to the whole sedra here. And I'm going to go like, when's the Kiddush?
Well, that's because your powers of attention are too scanty. Barry, you want to go first, or I can go? I don't care.
So I was just, thinking about this while you were talking, Elliot. How do you think this is actually delivered? What's the tempo? Is it slow? Is it fast? And one of the things that struck me also listening to you is that the original audience didn't know when Moses was going to stop.
Right. Okay.
So they don't know what part of the speech they're in. And I think that might lead us to think about the audience perhaps a little bit differently, because they know they're going to enter the land very soon. And they know, because they've heard already, that their behavior is going to dictate their success in the land or not. And they don't know that failure is going to come rather quickly and rather often until everything collapses under the weight of their sin. So I think that even though it seems a little bit dry, and even though it may seem disconnected, there's also a certain amount of excitement about it, because this is getting ready to enter the land. This is what we have to do when we cross the river. And I think that might be exciting.
So you're basically relating it to other pieces of legislation in this book, which really has that as the framing device, which is when you enter the land, you such and such and such, right? And so here's how you build your society. Here's how you govern your society. Like, back in Parshat Re'eh a couple of weeks ago, we had when you enter the land, you will, go to the place that God chooses. You will have your ritual life. And the same question could be asked even for all of that, which is there's lots of details with regard to the holidays. But here, this is, these are details relating to war. These are details relating to family. These are details relating to parenting. And I'm just talking about the three titles heading for the three first paragraphs here. Okay. And I almost want to say I'm as a person anachronistically listening to Moses, just like, can you press pause for a second? Just can you go over this with me for a second? Because I got a 12-year-old, let's say, and this 12-year-old, I asked this 12-year-old to clean up his part of the tent, and he had some words, okay, which I can't repeat here. All right. And are you telling me that I need to come to the elders of the town? I'm reading chapter 21, verse 20. V'amru el ziknei iro, the parents, b'neinu zeh, our son, sorer u'moreh, is rebellious and gluttonous, or sorer.
Yeah, wayward and rebellious.
Wayward and einenu shomea b'kolenu. He doesn't listen to us. Zolel v'soveh. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Okay. And then urgamuhu kol anshe iro. So then you're telling me that the people, the entire town, when we go into the land, is going to stone this kid, and he's going to die. And you should, get rid of the evil in your midst. And let everyone hear. And so, like, just going to run this by me again, please. Okay.
Okay. So a couple of thoughts about this. First of all, I want to, in a minute, I'll speak about Ben Sorer Umoreh for a second, but in a minute, I want to return to the phrase that you just quoted from this verse, Uviarta hara mikirbecha. I think that's, and you will root out the evil from amidst you. I think that's very, very central to understanding this parsha. But just real quick about the Ben Sorer Umoreh, there are a number of mitzvot in the Torah. The sotah, the trial of the suspected but unproven, because the nature of adultery is that way. You can't always catch somebody in the act. the trial by ordeal of the suspected adulteress, the battlefield rape that we have at the beginning of this parsha, Eshet Yifat Toar. You have the Ben Sorer Moreh. You have the impaling of an executed body. Each of these things are cases where people in the full flush of rage or passion, desire for good, desire for bad. In the Sotah case, the adulterous case, it says that the spirit of jealousy takes hold of the husband and he kind of loses his composure. In each case, the Torah is saying, you need to turn over this case to a local authority, to some other authority than your own passion, because your own passion is going to lead you to do something terrible. Now, of course, we want any decent person here in the 21st century would much prefer that the Torah says battlefield rape is absolutely forbidden under all circumstances. This is an ancient book, and there are differences in history from what ancient people expected and what modern people expect. But in that case, the rabbis have a great phrase for describing how law is sometimes not the description of the way people should always behave, but is a reform to restrain our worst impulses. The rabbis say, Dibra Torah keneged yetzer hara. The Torah was addressing our worst impulses. So instead of just saying, be much better than this terrible world around you, the Torah says, okay, well, be a little bit better than this terrible world around you. We're going to try to restrain you a little bit. Okay, I think that some of these very, very strange commandments, which we cannot, get our minds around in some cases, are there to just put a little bit more restraint, just be a little bit better today than you were yesterday. But I think that overall, the reason that I do love this parsha was all 74 mitzvot. Not every one of the mitzvot fits the pattern that I'm about to say, but a lot of them do. And I think 8 or 10 times in the parsha, it does say that phrase, "Uviarta hara mikirbecha," or "Uviarta hara Yisrael." You have to root out wickedness in your community. I think many of the laws are about finding some generosity, compassion, empathy, chesed in an otherwise tough world. So, I'll throw out a few examples, right? Don't plow with an ox and a donkey together. Who cares? Why? Because it is an act of animal cruelty to match these two animals in a way that neither of them is capable. An agricultural worker is always permitted to eat from what it is that they are harvesting. If I hire you to harvest up my apples, you're not allowed to bring a bag and stuff it full of my apples, but you're allowed while working to eat some of the apples, because it would just be cruel if I made you sit among all this abundance and you're hungry and you have nothing. I can think of some more examples. The prohibition on charging interest. I'm rich, you're poor, you come to me for money. I am commanded to open up my heart and open up my checkbook and give you this loan. And I cannot use it as a way to gain even more power over you. I have to awaken the kindness, awaken the goodness. I can't have unjust weights and measures. All of this stuff is about restraining our bad impulses and trying to cultivate our kind ones.
So what I'd like to suggest, so modern biblical scholars date the Devarim to the 7th century, the 600s before the Common Era. And I think perhaps it's important to note that the laws that we're encountering don't really fit the circumstances of the generations that is going to cross the Jordan for the first time and settle in the land and have to settle into a new life, but rather it's to govern the society further down the road that is a little more developed, assumes that most of the people are farming, which doesn't seem too likely when they first enter the land that all of a sudden they're going to pick up a hoe and begin to farm. And perhaps that is the element of reform that comes in. In other words, it's to, as you suggested, Jeremy, to transform a society because the society is changing. It's not necessarily the case that there's something wrong with what we're doing, but we're doing something else now. We need a new set of laws to help us govern that. And that's what Devarim comes to do.
So I'm thinking about this in terms of the experience of listening to it, and on the one hand, I would say, my experience in the synagogue is that with almost every parsha, this is delivered liturgically. So we're listening to the chant, and our act of worship is basically listening. But as the three of us, discuss these specific cases, what I'm learning from this is that each law here is an opening for a discussion. It's an opening for a discussion based on, well, what is the law? How do you adjudicate the situation? And I think something even more interesting is, what's the story here? And we're always looking for a good story, but in each of the cases, in the opening paragraphs, it's a good story about rebellious children. Little communities are turned on their ear when there's a dysfunctional family within them, and and they are summoned in some way to intercede. This is not a private matter when your kid is acting out, because every family is going to be affected by this, especially if it's taken to the extreme where everybody has to stone this kid. It's so interesting, just dipping into that, that passage, the Mishnah, you call Mishnah, it's in Sanhedrin, it's
Hey,
yeah, where they discuss the Ben Sura More, and what's fascinating about it is they find so many different limiting principles here. It's the minutest of the minutest circumstances. The kid has to be a certain age based on certain physical characteristics. Both parents have to have all of their faculties.
Their voice, they have to have a similar voice, because he doesn't listen to our voice.
Exactly.
And they have to take him by the hand. They both have to have hands.
Right. So it's such a great exercise in Talmudic reasoning to begin with, and it shows how I think the rabbis themselves are morally not frustrated, but they're engaged on a moral and intellectual level to neutralize what could be, a devastating set of laws outside of a context of conversation.
So I want to add 2 points here. So when you were first discussing the law, you have this son who doesn't listen to the parents. He's a drunkard and a glutton, and so we'll take him to the town and stone him, and it's almost as if the law is telling the parents, this is really what you want to do.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps it's saying in a non-legal way, no, that's not what you're going to do. That if this is what you're describing, you're surely not going to kill your kid. And listening to your last summary of the Mishnah, it led me to conclude that what the rabbis are really doing is nullifying the law and making it a story.
Right.
And so it's just a story. It has no legal force because we've removed any application of the law.
Right, and we've enabled that language to become symbolic language within the language.
And I think, Rabbinic Judaism is more, at least in my reading of it as a conservative Jew, is more about the story than about the law.
Indeed, and I think that's probably why I'm reacting to this parsha in a way that's kind of consistent with the majority of our membership, which is, we're not relating to the law. We don't relate to legal halachic things, notwithstanding that we are a halachic movement, but we're more inclined to be,
storytellers,
drawn into the story. Right? There's each one of the. This is what I say. I want to say that each one of these situations arises out of a story. I mean what you quoted before, Jeremy, 22:1. Lo tireh et shor achicha. No, I'm sorry, you didn't quote this one.
It fits my paradigm, though. It's fine.
Yeah, so it's 22:1, which is Lo tireh et shor achicha o et seo nidachim. Don't if you happen to see, or it's not worded if you happen, but do not see your way the ox of your brother or his sheep nidachim wayward, right? Vitalamta mehem. Don't turn your eyes away from them. Hashev teshivem lachicha. You got to return them, right? There's a story there. The story there is, oh, it's 5:30. The sun is setting. I mean, I gotta, I see my neighbor across the street. I don't like my neighbor. I don't talk to my neighbor, but I see his cow, I see his ox, I see his sheep, and you know what? I better go collect that, because it's just not the way to live in a society where we let our sheep go out. And that's the story here. And so the law comes and there's a story, or the story comes and then there's the law, you know. And that's, so I would say to a congregant who says to me, come on, this is just boring. I say, wait a minute, there's life here. There's lots of life here. And we have to listen to these laws for the song here, because they may have been delivered with the music of that encodes this information, so that people can remember it, so that it's part of what they do and they recite in order to adjudicate things in life. And you may not have a sheep or a cow today, but if I bet if someone stole your car and it was parked 4 blocks away, you'd want someone to knock on your door and say, I saw your gray Toyota Camry from 2010 on the other side of the street, to which I'd say, leave it there.
Here's the registration. It's all yours.
I know someone's always.
We mentioned the Talmud and Sanhedrin about the rebellious and wayward child, and Barry said the rabbi seemed to be nullifying it and turning it more into story. And of course I agree with the general gestalt of that explanation, but I just want to add one thing to it, which is that when you read that chapter in the Talmud, what becomes evident is that the rabbis think that the Torah is indicating that they should discover that in the Torah itself. Like modern people, I think, it's not really hard for us. It's not intellectually hard. It's not spiritually hard to say, this is an ancient book. I don't have to agree with everything. I can disagree with certain parts. I know that this has a history. I don't think that, certainly ancient or medieval people had that in their toolkit. So because this seems, significantly cruel or, inappropriate,
unusual,
highly unusual, and not really matching, human instinct towards their children. I mean, listen, people, I think in the end, the Bible does think you should if you spare the rod, you'll spoil the child. It thinks you should beat your children and stuff like that in a way that, chas v'chalila, we tend not to think nowadays. But the rabbis didn't have in their toolkit to say, I just think this is wrong. What they had in their toolkit was to say the things that we mentioned, when a man has a son, so the father has to be a certain age and the son has to be a certain age, they know that there's no death penalty. This is just a postulate of the Torah's law. There has to be a specific prohibition, and you have to have warning. And so there have to be multiple steps in which they take the child to a judge, and the judge issues a warning, and then the child repeats the action for the same set of witnesses, and the parents have to have the same, he doesn't listen to our voice, their voices have to be similar. They have to take him, they both have to be able to walk, they both have to be able to grab him by the hand, and all these things. The sages didn't think that, we might think that they were reading into it. They didn't think they were reading into it. They thought they were discovering the divine hints for making this a story and a metaphor rather than a practical rule. And the Talmud's, in my opinion, just fabulous, some summary of that. They say, okay, if that's the case, why was the thing written at all?
Yeah.
If it was never meant to be practiced, why was it written at all? And the Talmud's answer is drosh v'kabel sachar. Expound it and discuss, receive the reward for the incredibly sensitive reading that you've got. You have had to research this, think about it, and the reward you get is not, God forbid, executing, rebellious adolescents, but for understanding the Torah, not superficially, but really, really, really deeply between the lines.
Right. But here we also have to point out that on that page of Talmud that discusses this, there are essentially 3 cases with 2 diametrically opposed opinions. The cases of Bayit HaMinugah, the house has been afflicted with leprosy, and the stubborn and rebellious son, and the Ir Nidachat, the city that is totally devoted to idol worship, which has to be destroyed. And one opinion for each of those 3 cases is lo haya v'lo yeh, never happened, it never would. And the other opinion is an eyewitness who said, but I was at the grave of the Ben Sorer Moreh, I saw this house, and I saw the ruins that of this Ir Nidachat. So what we're left with in the Talmud can't be law, but it has to be a story, because we have to somehow make sense of 2 diametrically opposed opinions being true at the same time.
Right. So I would say, maybe it's another way of saying, is this theory or is this practice? Is this case an actual case? Can we ever find an actual case? And
I think what it's saying ultimately is that our community requires people that disagree completely. We can't abandon either one.
right.
That somehow we have to find a way to live together.
I think that's underlying, and certainly, in the conversation here, we can all have different opinions about this. Maybe there's just one little
I would
element.
prefer that people had my opinion.
Okay, fine. We are linking back to the 10 Commandments also, because this is at least the negative reading of Commandment 5, or this is a different kind of reading of Commandment 5, which is Kabered avicha v'emecha, honor your father and your mother. And here we have the ultimate case of dishonor, where you're not listening to them. So it's not an accident that this violation of the 5th commandment occurs in the 5th book of the Torah, as the violation of the 4th commandment takes place in the 4th book of the Torah, etc. And on, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, according to the thesis of David Noel Friedman in his book, The 10 Commandments. Interesting thesis, that the first 9 books or 8, have violations of each of the commandments as unique events, and that this particular commandment is put here theoretically. And I say it theoretically is because, like you said, although there's an opinion that said that this rabbi saw the grave of a Ben Sorer Moreh, it's unimaginable that this would actually happen. So therefore, we're left to a theoretical exposition of this law, which gives us this story, basically. So here I'm saying that if I have a congregant who says to me, Rabbi Malamet, I'm going to sit through 40 minutes of this, and what's my answer? Listen to Parasha Talk.
listen to Parasha Talk, and you can tell them also, the great line, I don't remember exactly where this appears, but Lo davar reku, I mean, this appears in Parshat Nitzavim, but the word appears in the rabbinic literature, I don't remember, but Lo davar reku mikem, this is not this teaching I'll give you is not a vain thing. It's not
trivial or empty,
vacuous. And the rabbis say, "Ve'im davar reku mikem," and if it seems to you that it is vacuous, that's your own fault. So if somebody says this stuff is just ridiculous, I had a bat mitzvah last Shabbat in the afternoon, and again this upcoming Shabbat, and both kids. They want to talk about Ben Sorer Moreh and their Dvar Torah. Come on, man. But the if you don't find something meaningful here, I think you're just not trying, because there's this parsha includes the mitzvah of you cannot turn an escaped slave back over to his or her former master. Like, what an incredible thought in a world where there really was chattel slavery,
All right.
that if somebody escaped an abusive master, this is the Dred Scott law. You cannot return that person to their abusive master.
So maybe I'm gonna ask you to ask me the real question, which is, Elliot, what's really bothering you? And I'll tell you what's really
How do
bothering
you
me.
feel about that?
I'll tell you what's really bothering me is this, it's hard. It's really hard, especially now. My head's not there right now. This is where it's painful. My head is not in the theoretical, you know, legislation. My head is, elsewhere. My head is with the hostage. My head is with this convulsion in the Jewish people. My head is with, everything going on in this country. My I I'm looking for a hook in order to help me explain reality. The closest that I get to this week is really at the end of the Parsha, which is problematic when we recite it, at Shabbat Zachor, which is Timchet Zecher Amalek Mitachat Hashemayim Lo Tishkach, and which is really about dealing with evil on some level, and how, what are we supposed to do about this? And how are
This
we
is
to relate to
precisely
evil perpetrators?
this
Right.
is precisely it. This is the uviarta hara mikir becha. You have to root out the evil from in your midst. So when the Torah says to you, lo bekischa even va'aven gdola uktana, you shouldn't have in your pocket two different size weights, one a little bit big for when you're buying something and one a little bit small for when you're selling something. You shouldn't charge interest, that you shouldn't make an animal work without feeding it, that you shouldn't, make a human being work in food without giving the human being some food. All these things, I would say, root out the Amalek mikir becha, root out the little bit of Amalek that you have in you, because you do have a little bit of Amalek. I mean,
Okay, I can accept that. Not this year.
So what I would
gotta
say,
say
Elliot,
a real
is that
thought.
the answer to your question, I think, is to focus on the Haftarah.
Okay,
At this
so
time of year, we have the Haftarot of consolation. That's how our tradition designates them. And
Right.
perhaps the lesson for us is that sometimes we turn away from the Torah and turn to the Haftarah for comfort.
total agreement. And I would say maybe even, and we don't have time to get into it now, but maybe even those words, Timchet Zecher, maybe they call for a different kind of interpretation. I'll just give you a hint for a sec. I read Salman Rushdie's memoir Knife, about being, someone who attempted to murder him, and the way he relates to the assailant, he doesn't even name the assailant, and he says, look, because I my even though our lives were bound together in one moment of the attempted murder, um, that individual has lost humanity to me, and I'm erasing his name. I thought that was a fascinating way of looking at this. The person is alive. I'm not going out to avenge the person. Is put in jail. Has got a whole system, whatever. But my job here is to relate to life, and my job here is to understand my humanity. And at a certain point, I have a limit to my compassion for people who perpetrate evil, especially against me. And that's where I am right now.
I think this is true. I think this is descriptively true. I think it is reasonable to have a limit to your compassion, but I think that is in and of itself a moral claim. There's this wonderful poem by a Palestinian, his name escapes me right now, called Revenge, in which she says, I really want, if I could meet my enemy, I would avenge myself upon him, but not if he had a mother or a father or a brother or a sister or a spouse waiting for him back at home. And there was another kin, and I would just cause more and more misery through the world. But if he had no parent and no sibling and no kin and no lover and no friend, I would think that loneliness was misery enough to
Let him
that person, and I wouldn't inflict any more devastation upon him. And I just think that moment of somebody who may feel justified rage, because we do have real enemies. I mean, like if Yahya Sinwar was in your hands, you know, I don't doubt that I would inflict, you know, vengeance
Mortal
upon him.
damage on him, right?
But
You were capable, but this is.
But I also think that one of the great challenges is not to give into that, and even if it's a little bit of Amalekiyut. I don't really want to say that even my enemies have lost their humanity. I actually want to say that they have retained their humanity, even though I must defeat them because it's the only moral course, because I can't let them take advantage of me again.
Right. So you know, it's not surprising we might differ on this, but the thing is, like, I remember even like Leah Rabin when the murderer was put to jail, was sentenced, and she said, "I don't care about him. Whatever happens to him doesn't interest me. I have no emotional relationship to that individual. That individual destroyed my life." And whatever happens to that individual, I don't care. I've cut my human empathy for that individual, and that's a mechia, that's an erasure. And for radical evil, there's erasure. That's why, you know, in a sense, there's something very wise about this. People who take lives and commit evil, they have erased their humanity. They have erased humanity for us. And so the answer for them, in the absence of power, I have no power over these people, but I have only one power, which is I can erase their name, and I will if I'm able to. You know, obviously, you know, there's certain circumstances. We're recording this on 9/11. You know, you know, we want to name the victims. We want to leave the perpetrators' names unnamed forever. They should be erased. That's their destiny, and that's what I take away from that. It's you know, powerful in the sense that it makes a powerful demand on me morally, or not, maybe, or you know, it puts a conversation for us, which has come to a conclusion, I see on the clock here. So sorry for ending on a serious note, but the legislation demands a serious conversation, all of it. And I'm glad that we had this chance to have that conversation. In the meantime, I want to thank our viewers or listeners for watching, for listening. You're part of a community that gets inspired weekly by these conversations. Jeremy, Barry, we'll say good Shabbos to everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
We'll see you next week on the next edition of Parasha Talk. Bye-bye.